Welcome back, everyone, to the Culture Base Podcast. I'm Dustin. He's Blake. It is a new year. I was going to say Happy New Year, but I just read a thing I saw a reel on Instagram of Larry David talking about how there's really only a 3-day window after the new year to be able to say Happy New Year. And then after that, it's just like, what are we doing here? Yeah. So it's January 9th, the day that this releases. So how's your year been so far? How about I ask that? How's your year been so far?
Considering we're doing this on the 9th, apparently, too. The last 8 days have been fantastic. Fantastic. No, it's been honestly this is my favorite time of year. I love starts and I love routines. I love developing routines and putting them in my life. And then it was funny. In fact, I went upstairs earlier. One of my daughters was up and I was getting coffee. And she said, "You happy, Dad?" And I was like, I am happy. She's like, "Well, because routine." And I was like, "How do you know that about me?" She's like 10 years old. And I was like, "Yeah, I love routine." She goes, "Oh, I know. It's like God, family, routine." And I was like, "Okay, well, there might be truth that." I go, "Do you know why I like routine though?" And she was like, "I don't know." And I was like, because of the impact I can have by the routines that I set on the world. And she was like, "That's pretty cool." And I was like,
yeah, it is. Get you some.
Let's go. Parenting moment.
Get you some routines.
Yeah.
Well, I've said it on this podcast before, but in our house, we use the word rhythms because they're a little bit more flexible.
Sounds sexier
than routines. And it also sounds sexier. Let's be honest.
I got this Doubtfire, and you were like
coming in all Tom Cruise with the Scientology going, "Have you thought about rhythms?"
That's funny.
Yeah, rhythms are a little bit more flexible. They change with the season. I know we talk about full focus all the time and how we use that stuff. And they have the morning routines and things like that they put in there. And I cross the word routine out and put rhythm because that's how I roll. And they flex though. Like I flex mine every 3 or 4 months, really kind of every season. Every time the seasons change, they flex. I mean, quite literally, because like my wife and I do morning walks. And we don't do it in the dark. We try to do it like when the sun comes up, and that time changes, right? So right now the walk is a little bit later than it normally is in the summertime. We can get out there a little bit earlier. But anyway, you didn't tune in today to hear us talk about our rhythms and routines.
But you're welcome, because it's great.
Bonus January content. Let's get going.
How's your new year?
You know what? It's good. It's good. I am cautiously optimistic.
Good.
Right now. So just pushing forward one day at a time, next right thing, all that jazz. So, but yeah, I'm excited. Enough about us. We're here to help you folks, leaders. That is, we're here to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop a scalable team to get there. Today, we're going to talk about how we at the Culture Base determined our culture values and how you can do that as well. But before we get into that, I want to remind you to subscribe on any audio podcast platform you're listening on. Leave us a 5-star review. That stuff really helps us get the word out more about the content that we're sharing with you. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there. We're so excited that you're here. We would encourage you to hit the like button, the little thumbs up. Again, that super helps get our content out further. Go ahead and subscribe and ring the bell while you're there. So anytime we post content, or as we've been teasing for half a year now about going live, which it's getting closer. One day we're just going to do it. It's like a thief in the night. You're not even going to know. We're just going to go live. And if you don't have that bell rung, you ain't going to know about it. Yeah. So I'm excited. We're going to do some of that though, for real, coming up. If you would like to follow us anywhere on the socials, you can follow us always at The Culture Base, BASE. You can find us there on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the places. We'd love to connect with you on any of those platforms. And then finally, you can find our website at theculturebase.com. You can find there a link to get your free 30-minute strategy session with us on anything that we discuss on this podcast. That's all the business, I think. I gave it the business. All right. So on to this episode. It's a new year, and teams everywhere, Blake, are filled with lots of ambition, right? They got the goals, they got fresh determination to make it the best year ever. We're going to charge the mountain, we're going to conquer this hill, we're going to do it. Let's make 2024 the best one ever. I've heard that so many times in the last couple of days. It's going to be the best year ever. I hope so. I hope it is for you. I hope it is for me. But like I said earlier, I'm cautiously optimistic. Let's not get so far ahead of ourselves, is what I'm saying, that we forget the crucial foundation of knowing what you and your team are for by defining your culture values. So today, Blake, we're going to discuss how we at the Culture Base determined our culture values and some practical steps for you to determine yours. Listen, it's important, I think, for us to have our own culture values defined with a story and reason, which we're going to talk about here as we get into it. But I want to let you know as well, before we get too deep into this, that each day this week, we're not going to get too deep into what our culture values are. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that were important to us, but we're also going to release some short videos on YouTube this week to kind of further explain, get into what our actual culture values are at the Culture Base. And we'll talk about why we want to share those with you here in a little bit. But I want to make sure before we get into this to remind you that your culture will always be defined whether you do it or not.
Yeah.
It's going to be defined. And so why not take control of that narrative and own it rather than letting it be, well, that's just what it is. That's just what we're known for. I think there's a real opportunity, especially as we're thinking about fresh starts and New Year's and taking the mountain, that there's an opportunity for us to kind of take back control of that narrative. So for us, Blake, since we were a new company, let's talk about this for a minute. There are some people that are listening to this or watching this, and they're a brand new company. Maybe they launched at the end of last year, or they're in the middle of launching right now. But they don't really have kind of any kind of culture already established that they need to kind of harness or readjust or take back control of the narrative. They're kind of starting from the ground up, much like we were here at the Culture Base not that long ago, thinking about some of the things that mattered to us. And so as we sat down and started thinking about the things that were most important to us, what kind of characteristics are most important to us on a team, these are some things that we came up with. I know this first one here, Blake, at least this topic, again, we're not going to necessarily get into what we landed on, but at least the category of the value, I know was something that was a big deal to you when we sat down and talked about this, Blake. What was that?
Our first one being vulnerability and candor. And is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Just kind of that's not necessarily how we worded our
Sure.
our culture value, but just topically speaking, we knew right at the top
exactly.
that was something that was going to be important to us.
And that's exactly what Dustin's saying. The idea of defining all of this first and foremost by ideas, themes, topics, like what are the things you want to be about? And I think as you're starting, like for us, it was vulnerability and candor was really important. But as you start something, you don't already have people involved, which we'll talk about here in a minute. When you don't have that, I think there are two things you got to do, and that is vision and counsel. Okay. So the first thing I would say is vision. There's a reason in our 6 building blocks to a scalable team that our first one is vision. Okay. Because you can't build a culture around a direction if there isn't a direction there. Like you can't build something that's supportive to get you to an end if you don't have the direction or the vision figured out first. You've got to have a clarity, because if you're like, man, what we're going to do is be the best organization that always follows, policy. We always follow this. You can't make certain core values or culture values built around creativity and like trying to think outside of the box and cut corners. And some of those values are really good in other organizations, but if you don't have a good direction and vision, then you run into a bit of a wall. Okay.
Yeah.
So first, I would say you've got to have vision figured out. You've got to have direction figured out before you can jump into what culture and what things you're going to stand for, because it's the way you're going to do it, right? Like if you don't know what you're doing, You're not going to have a way to do it. So that becomes a big number one. The reason I say number two is counsel is kind of like what we're doing here today, is going through all these topics, or these like our core values. Or this week we're going to talk about our culture values that are important to us. This is where I think it's just super wise to study companies who are out there that are doing things you wish you were doing.
Mm,
See what makes them tick, read books about them, um, see if they're authentic to their values, right? Like, look into all that kind of stuff, because when you're studying that kind of stuff, you start to pick up, man, that I align with this. My team is aligns with this. Maybe there's something thematically that we stand for that we need to start kind of pulling out. So I think if you don't have people already in your organization and it's already moving, because that's kind of a different aspect, a different way to kind of go about it to figure this out.
mhm,
That's a good way to start, is to start developing themes. So yeah, ours, it's really important to us. Like, all the people, the main stakeholders in the culture base, as we talk, one of the things that we just really value is vulnerability. Why? Because we know that our biggest commodity in life is time, and our biggest purpose in life is others, right? And
mm,
so when time, and why I say time, because vulnerability and candor just cuts through all the shit. It just cuts through the stuff. It cuts through all the BS, cuts through everything. And we get down to just saying what needs to be said. It doesn't mean we're a-holes to each other. I think it's important to like know how to say it. That's why candor is not just like saying it, it's knowing how to say it too.
mhm.
Um, but it's not hiding. It's not keeping things close to your chest. Oh, I don't want to share this because what if? No, no, no. We share, and then if we got issues with each other, we just deal with it. And
Yeah.
and that's really important to us.
Yeah, and so there's other things in here too. Like we want to make sure we're always working towards an ideal culture. That was super important to us as we were sitting around talking about these things, that we weren't just going to let, like I talked about earlier, we weren't just going to let the culture be defined by whatever happens, but we were going to kind of take control of the narrative right out the gate from the start as a company that's never existed before, and say these are things that are important to us, and we're setting that foundation initially before we start to build on top of that even further.
Mm.
There's other things in here too, like obviously excellence is a big deal for us. We want to be producing excellent quality work. And so we knew that category of a culture value needed to be in there. Strengths is an interesting one, Blake. I'd love for you to just talk about real quick, where we're talking about how our culture value is centered around people's strengths.
Yeah.
What were we kind of getting at when we were thinking about that category?
Yeah, for those who have been in a lot of like pop leadership culture and stuff like that, you probably know of the book Strengths Finders, which is really built around the idea that like to develop people's weaknesses, especially after you get past a certain age, where even though like neuroplasticity is definitely a thing and our brains continue to grow, there is a an aspect where we have already started to grow in certain strengths a lot easier than we would grow our weaknesses. And so instead of trying to be just well rounded, we wanted to find people who are really strong in their area and then play to that instead of having a whole bunch of like, well, yeah, you're probably not the right person to do this, but we're going to have you do this anyway. Like, our mindsets are like, we need to be about the things we're about, where our strengths are. Again, there's a time thing, because I want to say, and I'm going to mess this up, but like, to improve a weakness into a strength could take years,
Mm,
years, but to grow a strength can take minutes. And that's the difference, is when you're growing and focusing on what you're good at and what the value is you add to the world, instead of trying to be well-rounded and to try to be the superman to everybody's problems. You get an organization that understands that, like, I am not good at certain things that Dustin just kills it at, and instead of me trying to get really good at those things and spending time developing those things, it's just better for Dustin to use his superpower and me to use mine. And
yeah.
when we can build a culture around that, we're able to do a lot more with a lot less time.
Yeah, it breeds a culture of ownership and
Mm,
even a little bit of autonomy there too, of saying that this is my lane,
mm,
right? And so I'm going to trust you to stay in that, not necessarily stay in that lane, but I'm going to trust you to dominate that lane.
Yeah.
because that's a strength of yours. And so it's really just about empowerment across the board. And like you mentioned the word mindset in there too. We knew that we wanted to have something in our culture values about a mindset of failure, because so many,
Mm.
this is, I think, probably the most undefined like culture piece in a lot of companies, is there's an unwritten expectation that failure is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't buy into that, because if you're not failing, it means you're not trying, right? It's an effort based,
Yeah.
it's an energy and effort based category here for us to say that failure is okay, because, and not just okay, but celebrated, because it
Yeah.
means we're putting forth the effort and we're trying to stretch and we're trying to grow and we're trying different things out of the box. And maybe that didn't work. That's fine. What we learned from it is that that didn't work. And here's why it didn't work. So when we try our next thing again, we got it better, right? Thomas Edison, I found 99 ways not to make a light bulb. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the idea here, is that we're learning, we're about learning, and we're about trying, and we're about effort. So mindset of failure is
Yeah.
really important to us.
The thing that's neat about that one, and you've said this before, Dustin, and I think it's important because right there, it's like, well, why would you put that in your culture values? Um, you're so good at saying that culture is not just about what you put into your culture, but it's about what you allow in your culture.
Yeah.
So this idea of failure is not going to be something that people tend to think I need to help create narrative.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll tell you, even in your organization now, let's say your organization's already going, there is a belief about failure that is happening in your organization right now, and you need to be the one controlling it.
Yep.
Okay. Because what ends up happening is a lot of burnout. We've talked about many reasons that burnout happens, but results is one of those. Okay. One of the reasons people come to burnout. And if there is an underlying tone when it comes to failure that of a at all costs we succeed kind of thing, you're going to burn
Mm.
people out.
Yep.
You're going to hurt them. And that's why, like, you need to gain control of that narrative. And then not only that, this is that part's actually maybe the easy part. Like, hey, remember, guys, failure is something we learn from. We don't. Okay, but if all of a sudden someone fails at something and it isn't ultra catastrophic, and you respond in an ultra catastrophic way,
Hmm.
you are not living up to what your standard is with failure.
No. No. Which I think leads really into our last category of interpersonal relationships being of high priority. We want to be the type of company that builds each other up
Mhm.
and doesn't tear each other down. We're not competing against each other. We're all working together towards the same goal.
That's it.
And that's really, really important, that we take time to work on the interpersonal relationships on our team, so that we can be achieving those things forward and not tearing down maybe some ideas or preconceived notions that everybody's bringing to the table. But like with that candor and with that, people working in their strengths and mindsets of failure, like all of those things play into how do we work together. And what does that mean? What does it look like when we work together well? That was a big category for us that we wanted to make sure we hit. Um, so a lot of you, though, are in an organization that's been around for a while. And so we wanted to spend the rest of our time with you today talking about, if your organization has already existed for a while now, here are some things that we would consider, or that we would guide you through. This is stuff that we do, as a service, that we would walk you through as part of our culture review, and kind of helping you clarify that vision and culture piece. Here's some things that we would say, that some steps that you should take to gain a better understanding and define what your culture is, and kind of move it forward. And so the first thing I would say is to really be intentional about taking a day or even a half day with your leadership team off site. And
Mm.
here's what you're going to do when you get off site: on a whiteboard, a giant post-it note, whatever you want to do, something that someone can that everyone in the room can see. You're going to write down every characteristic of your team that already exists that you really love about your team. You're like, oh, I love that our team puts each other before themselves. I
Mm.
love that our team it celebrates failure. I love that our team is super honest with each other. Like all these things, you're going to list all those things out that you super love about your team,
Yeah.
and you'll start to see kind of these trends pop up, and we'll develop that even more.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think I always call that, um, it's almost like your serial killer wall. Like
Mm,
that's where you start having all this stuff just scattered everywhere.
yeah.
And I would I would tell you in that time, allow that to happen. Allow chaos to happen in that
Yeah.
time, because some of the best stuff is in the margins that you're writing in, not necessarily like in the organization you're setting up. And I know Mr. Routine is talking like that, but at the end of the day, being able to think through those things and start to piece things together instead of self-editing as you're going through that process, you're going to get a better result for sure. Um, when you've got a team, like this is not me. This is Traction EOS, but we do this pretty religiously, honestly. Is a people analyzer is another helpful way to identify those things. So what Dustin was talking about was more 30,000 foot view. What does our team do well at? What do we do well in communication style? How, you kind of look at all these different areas of your business and you look for values. But then on a people analyzer, what we'll do is go through and you think of like your top 3 to 5 to 7 high performers. Okay. Doesn't matter what they do. Doesn't matter. But these are the people that you're like, when they get that cloning thing down, I know who I'm cloning. Okay. And you look for those people and then you write their name down. And what we did is we don't do this like out loud. We'll sit down, everyone writes 3 to 5 people. And then you go around the circle and those people read, here are the 3 to 5 people I picked, and here's why. And then you just start writing it down. And then oh yeah, I also said, Jerry on that one. Here's why I picked Jerry for that. It was a little different than yours and it was this. And then you're building out these entire lists. And then you stand back and do your serial killer thing again, where you start taking yarn and drawing things together. And you're like, oh, these things are the same. And okay, maybe there's something bigger here that we need to look for, consistency wise. Maybe there's something that we need to really value here. Okay. Also, even though this is generally with places that don't already have people, I still think being a good student of other companies is going to benefit you greatly. When you can go look at other people's values, ways they say things. I mean, even like I think we have something very similar, but like my electrical company, we have a value of we, not me, right? And there are so many other companies who have the exact same value and it's said 300 different ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
We is
And
greater than me.
we is
We
greater
over
than
me.
exactly. And so like
We
all that
before me.
verbiage, all that verbiage is important though. And it's important to the culture and the organization because again, it's not just those things you stand for, it's how you walk in those things, right? Like I remember early on, like I value marriage. I love
Yeah.
being married. I really do. But there were some branding type of things like that I just wouldn't go to the conferences because they seemed cheesy. And eventually I had to get past some of my own stupidity and understand that there was good stuff there. But I think you got to also look at the voice. The voice is important and how this stuff is said. And so looking at other organizations is also just giving you other flavor too for what is the flavor of our organization, not just the culture, but the flavor and the way we communicate and process these things.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so I think as you start to throw those things on the board, you're going to start to see uh some similarities and some recurrences, which we'll talk about in a second. But as Blake's talking about looking at other organizations' values and kind of how they say things, I just want to remind you one more time that this week on our YouTube channel, if you're listening to this, go over to just search the Culture Base on YouTube and you'll find us. But on our YouTube channel this week, we're going to kind of break down each one of our values and what they are and what they mean. So if you're looking for some inspiration, you can very easily start there as we walk through each of those with you. But Blake, you want to talk about real quick about some things to stay away from. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. And I kind of hinted at this already, but I think, yeah, and you said this earlier, try to stay away from aspirational values.
Hmm.
The values where you really want to have it, but your team is not that. And it is not the thing, like, you want to have that sexy value that's like, oh, we are top of the line and we do these things. But your value doesn't even really, or like your company doesn't even really value that thing. You can start to like not know who you are as a company, and that's dangerous. Okay.
Yeah.
It's basically see it like the equivalent of a midlife crisis. Okay. That's essentially what's happening here is when you are like, I don't know who I am. And so I'm going to project who I am and then I'll become that. And the thing is, you're dealing with a lot of people
Hmm.
and a lot of people who stand for something and came to your team because of something with you or with your leadership team. They came because they said, I want to be a part of this. And maybe it started as I wanted to do this type of work, but they're staying because of who, and what's going on and what you stand for. So trying to create aspirational values is maybe a bit dangerous in my opinion. um, Not that you can't have inspirational values that push people to want to be more. I think that's okay.
Hmm.
But if it's like, again, like the whole like we want to be the most creative misfits, like I'm stealing some of Apple's stuff here, the misfits who never stood in line and did the things that we wanted to do, and yet your whole thing is government finance.
Yeah.
Ah, I feel like maybe you need to dot your I's and cross your T's and not be that misfit, right?
Yeah.
So those are some things I think I would kind of caution.
Yeah. So as you're throwing these things up on the board, you're going to start to see some similarities. But before you do that, one thing I encourage teams to do when they're walking through this is they've wrote down all the things that they love about their team. They wrote down the people analyzer. Oh, Jerry's so good at this and this and this. And so you kind of start to personify these things a little bit and you see how they're all played out on a day-to-day basis. What I would encourage you to do next is to make a separate column or a separate page of everything about your team that you either hate or you want to stay away from. Like, I
Mm,
never want to be a team that throws each other under the bus. I
yeah.
never want to be a team that puts profit over good character. I never
Mm,
want to be the type of team who lies to get ahead. Like these types of things. Or, you know what, we really struggle with this as an organization now. We need to do something to counteract that. Right. And so you start to throw those up on the board. And now you're going to start to see some similarities in both lists. Right.
yeah.
You're going to see that yin and yang of the side of same side of the coin, or different sides of the same coin is what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say.
There it is.
You'll see those similarities and recurring topics and tones come up. And so from there, what I encourage you to do is, as you're noticing those similarities, just circle some similarities, right, and start to group those things together in a bit of a mind map.
Mm,
And then each of you in the room, whether it's two of you or eight of you in the leadership team that are walking through this exercise, start to name two or three values that you feel organically fit and both challenge your team at the same time.
mm, yeah.
And then again, people will start to say, yeah, I was thinking that too, or I was thinking maybe wording it this way, because we often use this word over this word, right? It's kind of
Mm,
that this, not that mentality. You'll start to
yeah.
see some of that stuff play out a little bit. And then once you have everybody's kind of throwing up two or three different things, even in those, if you have eight people in the room and everybody submits to that 16 values, that's way too many values, right? But you're going to start to see, oh, well, person two and person seven and person eight, they all kind of said the same thing. So we're going to group all those one together and word it this way. And so really what you're looking at is what we tell our clients and people that we're working with is really no more than 5 to 6, because you want them to be things that are memorable.
Mm,
You want these to be things that, if you have a huge, 10 to a dozen to 16 different values, it's going to get really confusing to your people as you're working through the day to day. Because these values, again, we're not just making a cool inspirational poster and putting it in the lobby of your workspace. Like, these are things that we're going to hire and fire on. These are things that we're going to measure success and failure on. These are things we're going to do annual reviews and evaluations on, and things like that.
mhm.
So these are things that are going to be pretty sticky. And if they're going to be sticky, they need to be something that you can remember. And so
Yeah.
I think narrowing it down, that 5 to 6 is a good sweet spot. Some people can get away with 7 if they're short enough, but really that sweet spot is no more than 5 to 6 to make it memorable.
Yeah.
What
And
would you say as they're wrapping up that time, Blake? What should they do?
yeah, in that memorable aspect, um, Dustin early on talked about having stories that cement this stuff. When you do finally kind of, hey, here are 5 or 6, um, put them in your voice for sure. But like, we need to have that story aspect and
Mhm.
something that's going to make it shocking in some way. Um, because even 5 to 6 things is still a lot of things to
Yeah.
remember.
Hmm.
And even though you're like, oh yeah, no, we're good people, I can remember that. Like that's not going to move mountains here, right? That's not going to push us in those. You're wanting something in the time of conflict, in the time when you are presented with that fork in the road, where you are going to make a character decision to do the right thing or the wrong thing, that they have a clear definition of what that is. That's
Hmm.
what it is. What is the right thing? What is the wrong thing? And if you can't give them that, we're in trouble,
Yeah.
because they're going to do whatever they think's best, and that might not be the right thing for you.
Might not
Um,
align.
the this not that list, so important. Uh,
Hmm.
have it be a living list, and don't ever stop it,
Hmm.
because your organization's going to grow and develop. Do core values and culture values change? I know that's going to be a question. I think that it evolves. Okay, that's the best way I could say it. As I don't think that we go from caring about people to not caring about people, but I think it could go from caring about people to being a little more specific on what that means as you evolve and grow. And so, because of that, having a living list is going to be beneficial to
Yeah.
revisit. What are the things we stand for? What are the things we'll never do?
Yeah.
Or what are the things we don't think we'll do, but maybe, who knows? Maybe there's some gray area stuff. Call
Yeah.
that stuff out. That's okay. You don't have to be perfect. This is an old whole failure thing again. You don't have to be perfect. Just get some progress here. But
Right.
more important than anything, when you get these 5 to 6 and you're like, these are it, don't run out and shout it at the mountain. Okay. Don't stop. Let it marinate. This kind of stuff needs to sit with you for a while, especially like the voice of how you're going to present this, the stories that are important behind these things, the things that make it stick. It's going to be really important to see how are we going to communicate this, but let it marinate. Like, it's okay that you don't tell everyone what you stand for. You're already doing that. Like, you're already doing what you stand for by how you present this stuff. And that's why it's so important to me that these aren't just aspirational. These are character. These are the things you
Yeah.
stand for. You're showing these things already. You're not going to have a mass exodus happen because you didn't have your core values written out and up on a wall somewhere. That's not going to happen. You're going to have a mass exodus because you don't stand for the things you said and people see you as hypocritical. Okay,
Yep.
that's more important. So let it marinate, and then after it marinates, Dustin, thoughts?
Yeah, 30 days is a good timeline just to let it sit so that you're not rushing it. This is too important to rush, but it's also not something that you want to let linger on for months and years at a time. This is something that you want to be able to roll out to your team. So 30 days I think is a good, and then reconvene with that same leadership team. Hey, you've had time to think about this. You've had time to view your office culture or your organization culture through the lens of this last discussion that we had. Maybe you've seen some things play out that you liked or you didn't like, and you think, oh, here's where the rubber really meets the road for us. This is kind of the ground level, terminology we should be using here, and some things that we want to see and we don't want to see. And I'll add one more thing too about the stories. I think it's important that you make the stories personal
Mm,
as much as possible. If you have permission of a team member to discuss openly a point of conflict,
mm,
like Blake talked about, because that's where these culture values really take root. Is conflict with a client? It's interpersonal conflict within your team. It's conflict on a business decision that you have to make, which is the right decision, which is the wrong decision, a leadership decision, a management decision. This is where your values come into play. And so if you can make it personal and say, hey, do you remember last year when we were going through this potential buyout? with the company, right? And we were potentially going to have to merge with this other company. What we ultimately decided was X instead of Y, and here's why we decided that. It's because this value is so important to us. And you can kind of share those stories. Or hey, do y'all remember when it was like really tense around the office and person A and person B weren't really getting along and everybody could tell, but nobody really wanted to say anything? Here's why this is important to us moving forward. Being able to have that open, honest, personal dialect about those experiences, they'll be able to tie it in and go, oh, I remember that. And then when they see that again, they'll be like, oh, this is just like that last instance, because history repeats itself, right? Person A and person B might have been in conflict a year ago. Now it's person C and person D that are in conflict. And it may not be a buyout merger from that company. Maybe now it's a big business decision. Do we pull out of this project or do we advance with the project? Those types of things. And so being able to make that personal is a way to make people easily remember and bring back up in their file of their mind, oh, we're this, we're not that. And so because of that, we're going to make this decision. It makes the decision easier for you because you've already stated what you're going to be about. And there's no like back and forth of, I don't know, this could make us a lot of money. But you're like, but that's not us. We're more about this. And we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, because if we do, we're going to end up being a coffee company that sells pizza. And we don't sell pizza.
Right.
We make coffee. You know what I mean?
Good point.
That's always my go-to. I can't stand it. I can't stand it when I see that. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I don't have anything else. I like
it really
coffee.
bugs me that Burger King's more known for their chicken sandwich than they are for burgers. It's just it just bugs me. Anyway. Anything else to add to this? Like just crazy old me? Cool. All right. So yeah, I want to remind you again, you can check out our YouTube channel this week for a breakdown of our culture values that we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 6 culture values. So we'll break those down for you this week on our YouTube channel. I'd love to see you there. Next week on our podcast, Tuesday, January 16th, we're going to be back here talking about rehiring your team. That's going to be interesting.
This is a good one to follow.
It's a good one to follow this discussion. It's going to be great. So can't wait to see you then. Rehire your team. Check us out over on YouTube channel, where we're going to break down our culture values for you as you begin to write and define yours for the new year. How's your year been? We'll see, right? I'll talk to you next time on the Culture Based Podcast.